In this presentation, I'll be discussing psychoactive drugs and everything about them. So this includes its history, its uses, its effects on health, and its relation to our class and our population. So, the psychoactive the psychoactive class of drugs are drugs that act directly in the central nervous system in our body. They temporarily alter brain functions and can cause anything from hallucinations to incredible mood swings. The main functions that they alter are your perception of reality, your mood, your consciousness and ability to process information, and your behavior. Psychoactive drugs are neurological drugs that tamper with the neurochemistry of one's brain. There are two major effects of these drugs, being those of agonists and antagonists. They are essentially the effects with difference between increasing and decreasing the activities of the central nervous system, primarily the functions of neurotransmitters. Psychoactive drugs temporarily change the structure of these neurons, thus changing things like your mood and behavior. Psychoactive drugs can be fit into three large categories. These are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Depressants are meant to slow down the activity of your brain and of your body, hence the word depressed in its name. Depressants are almost always described and have a large amount of potentially unwanted side effect. Stimulants do the exact opposite though. They cause your brain to become hyperactive. They also tend to sharpen your senses and give you enhanced physical and psychological experiences. Hallucinogens are the extreme of this end though. They basically cause you to see, hear, and smell things that are quite literally are not there. These drugs are particularly dangerous and are almost always used in illegal ways. Psychoactive drugs have a relatively vast history of use and was almost exclusively in use for cultural purposes. So these drugs have use that date back to at least 10,000 years ago, but most notably around 5 years ago. And a good example of this history is in the Peruvian society, where they would chew cocoa leaves. Most of the use that we can see were either for rituals or just used medicinally. The other part of history regarding these drugs are their use and practicality in both personal and medical use. Some medical research of psychoactive drugs has claimed that the continued desire to use these drugs isn't so much an addictive behavior, but rather the desire to alter your consciousness and cognitive abilities temporarily as a primary function within our brains. Knowledge and awareness of psychoactive drugs is extremely important and significant to us, and our age group specifically. Assuming that a majority of the people within our wellness class are in their late teens to their early 20s and a typical college student, it is very likely that we have all had exposure to these kinds of drugs, whether it is our peers or even ourselves. College is a popular time in life to explore things that almost always involves drug use. It is critical to know, however, that psychoactive drugs have huge effects on the developmental stages of our brain, as they may still be developing at this point in our lives. They are used in some medications, but they are primarily for antidepressants and should never be used without prescription. Psychoactive drugs have an essential significance to our class population in particular. Our age group is notably more vulnerable to the influences, use, and exposure of these drugs. College offers an environment that allows for easy peer pressure and the obtaining of illegal drugs and psychoactive drugs, whether or not they are prescribed. It is very important to learn about these drugs and their effects, especially during this time in our lives, considering that this is where the drug affects us more. Okay, so the myth that I did find relating to these types of drugs is a myth that is also applicable to any kind of addictive drug, but it is, however, applicable regarding psychoactive drugs because of their own addictiveness. Dependence on drugs is a brain disorder in people with drug dependence, This is initially formed with compulsive behavior that slowly transforms into habitual behavior, which is a large part of the addiction in general. It has also been found that things like genetics or in child environment, well, genetics or child environments or anything like that have large influences on drug addiction. So, in conclusion, psychoactive drugs are essential to medicinal practice and have large influence in personal use. In our age group, especially in college in this part of our life, psychoactive drugs are relatively easy to obtain and are very addictive. We are more vulnerable to this exposure right now. These drugs heavily influence our cognitive abilities and can either dull or sharpen our senses to the extremes, and even can cause hallucinations. I believe that in light of all of this, it is critical that we learn about psychoactive drugs, learn what the major effects are, and when we shouldn't be using them. And these is all of my sources that I used for today's presentation. And yeah, I hope you enjoy.